desire to create cold spaces is universal. Many of the offices we work in and the homes we sleep in are kept cool during warm seasons of the year. Many of our industries operate in cold spaces. We keep much of our food in refrigerated containers. Even the spaces we live in are kept cool for our comfort. We even drive in air-conditioned cars when the weather is hot. In the food industry, cold spaces are created to work with and store perishable foods. Low temperatures help prevent meat, dairy, and other products from spoiling. The cold helps fruit and vegetables keep their color, texture, and nutrient content for longer periods. At higher temperatures, they more rapidly decay. Very low temperatures are used to prepare frozen fruits, vegetables, meats, and entrees that can be kept for many months. Freezing temperatures are also needed to produce treats such as ice cream, sherbets, and frozen popsicles. To create cold spaces, heat must be removed from the space and dumped to an external environment. Although several means exist for creating cold, the most common method is based on the mechanical vapor compression system. The system is based on the fact that the equilibrium between gas and liquid can be manipulated by pressure. For example, at atmospheric pressure, water will boil at 100 degrees C. Its vapor and liquid exist side by side. If placed under a vacuum, water can boil at a much lower temperature, at room temperatures and even lower. The properties of water, however, are not convenient for its use as a refrigerant. Other more useful compounds have been developed, including ammonia, R134A, and others. These are often low molecular weight, fairly volatile substances, and often contain chlorine or fluorine. They have boiling points near room temperature or below. In the mechanical vapor compression system, the refrigerant circulates in a closed loop through a series of components. The refrigerant liquid enters the evaporator, down inside the refrigerated space, and transforms the gas as it absorbs heat from the surroundings. A compressor takes the low-pressure vapor and converts it to high-pressure gas, with a vapor-liquid equilibrium temperature higher than that of the outside surroundings. A closer view shows how the refrigerant enters the evaporator, a series of vent tubes that act as a heat exchanger. It often has fins and even a fan. The liquid refrigerant transforms to a mixture of gas and liquid and finally all gas by the time it leaves the evaporator. The vapor enters the compressor, where a series of pistons compress it to high pressure. When the high-pressure vapor enters the condenser, it is now at high enough temperature to release the heat to the surroundings. In contrast to the evaporator, the gas entering the condenser turns to a mixture of gas and liquid, ending up as a saturated liquid before it exits the condenser. The relatively high-pressure liquid enters the expansion valve, returning to a low enough pressure suitable for the evaporator. In home refrigerators, the compressor resides near the bottom of the refrigerator and is usually accessible from the rear. The evaporators lie in the refrigerated compartments, often hidden from view. The condenser may also be near the floor or on the back of the refrigerator. In cars, the compressor resides in the engine compartment, with the motor turned by the car's engine. Engaging the AC causes a clutch to engage the compressor motor. In refrigerated manufacturing facilities, the compressors often lie on the roof or otherwise outside the building. Compressors and condensers are often located together, typically with a fan or cooling lines that helps remove heat from the area of the condenser. Lines carrying the refrigerant enter the compressor through penetrations in the roof or building walls. These lead from the evaporator in the cooled spaces inside the building. In the cold room inside, the evaporator is usually situated near the ceiling. Heat rises from the space below and is sucked in by fans to blow across the evaporator coils. The heart of the system is the compressor. The compressor consists of a motor that turns helical screws, a spiral, or crankshaft that drives pistons. In the piston-driven compressor, a piston compresses the gas and an exhaust valve opens when the gas reaches a specific pressure. On the downstroke, low-pressure vapor enters through a check valve. As the shaft turns, the piston begins its upstroke. This causes the intake valve to close. In addition to producing a drop in pressure, the expansion valve acts as a metering device. It allows the amount of liquid entering the evaporator to equal the amount of liquid being boiled off. This is accomplished by use of a temperature-sensing bulb filled with a similar gas as in the system. It causes the valve to open against the spring pressure in the valve body as the temperature in the bulb increases. Each refrigerant has a unique set of thermodynamic properties. This chart shows pressure on the y-axis and enthalpy, or heat content, on the x-axis. On the left side of the curve, the refrigerant exists purely as a liquid, in the middle as liquid and gas, and on the right side purely as gas. The inner portion of the curve, where liquid and gas phases exist in equilibrium, the temperature is determined by the operating pressure only. Straight lines across in this region are at constant temperature. The points of the refrigeration cycle can be mapped on this chart. The relatively low pressure side is determined by the suction pressure of the compressor. The high pressure side is determined by the operating temperature and pressure of the condenser. The input of the compressor is seen as point A. As the compressor does work on the gas, it raises both temperature and pressure to point B. The process is adiabatic. Heat is not added to the gas. Work is converted to heat. At point B, the refrigerant vapor is somewhat superheated. Its temperature is determined by its pressure. As the refrigerant enters the condenser, the superheat is lost and the refrigerant gas begins to condense into liquid. As this occurs, heat is released to the environment. This process follows an isothermal line at this point until it reaches the saturation point for the liquid at point C. From there, the liquid enters the expansion valve, where the pressure drops to the low side needed in the evaporator. In this process, some of the liquid is converted to flash gas. At point D, the lower temperature liquid is ready to enter the evaporator, where it absorbs heat from the surrounding and is converted back to a gas. Critical enthalpy properties and performance criteria can be determined from the chart. A line perpendicular to point D shows the enthalpy of liquid entering the evaporator, H1. As it absorbs heat from the cooled space, its enthalpy increases to H2. The difference, H2 minus H1, is the amount of heat each kilogram of refrigerant can absorb. The work of the compressor also increases the enthalpy. A perpendicular line from point B shows H3, the enthalpy of gas leaving the compressor. The difference, H3 minus H1, is the amount of heat released to the condenser. The heat absorbed in the evaporator is just H2 minus H1. The equivalent amount of work done in the compressor is H3 minus H2. The values can also be used to determine how well the compressor operates. This is measured by the coefficient of performance, which is the ratio of heat gained in the evaporator, H2 minus H1, compared to the amount of work done in the compressor, H3 minus H2. Typically, coefficients of performance above 5 or 6 cannot be attained. We have assumed the vapor leaving the evaporator was saturated, that it's still at the temperature for the phase equilibrium between liquid and gas. Likewise, we assume the liquid refrigerant leaves the condenser at saturated conditions. In fact, it is more common to allow the vapor leaving the evaporator to become superheated by 5 to 20 degrees. This somewhat improves performance and ensures that only vapor enters the compressor. Likewise, the liquid leaving the condenser may be undercooled. How do we know for sure? At 0.15 megapascals, a system running R134 refrigerant would have a saturation temperature of minus 20. At 0.8 megapascals, the temperature at saturation is plus 30 degrees C. If the system has superheating, we would still read 0.15 megapascals at the compressor inlet, but a higher temperature, say minus 10 degrees C. Likewise, for subcooling on the condenser side, we still read 0.8 megapascals, but a lower temperature, say 22 degrees C. The gas exiting the evaporator is superheated by 10 degrees C, while the liquid exiting the condenser is subcooled by 8 degrees C. The ability to create cold spaces is important to many facets of the food industry. The primary means of doing this is through mechanical vapor compression systems, which allow heat to be carried away from a cold space by means of circulating refrigerant and released at a higher surrounding temperature. This comes at a cost through the capital cost of the equipment and the amount of work done by the compressor.